Thank you, John. Pleasure to be here. Well, I think it was a combination. You know, there's the talent, which you're born with. I think that's why most songwriters tend to be humble, because we realize that we are born with it. We don't earn it or buy it or even nurture it sometimes. But the combination of the talent and then just a series of circumstances. I never wanted to do anything but be a singer and be a songwriter, and I kept trying to get to that goal, and I finally met the Reverend Gary Davis, who his wife took a shine to me, and he had me open a show, and somebody saw me and took me to a lawyer who took me to a producer, and 2 weeks later we recorded Society's Child. I think I say in the book that I understand better now, from the vantage point of having grandchildren and watching a lot of children grow up, that a parent doesn't want their child's life to be any harder than it has to be, because life is already hard enough. But at the time I was 14 and I was riding a bus living in East Orange, New Jersey, all black area, and I saw a black and white couple of kids. And they were making goo-goo eyes on the bus. You know, I won't say they were necking, but they were obviously very taken with each other. And everyone on the bus was glaring at them, and they were oblivious. And I remember thinking, I wonder if these people will have the courage to see this through, because that was such an unusual thing. It was 1965 to see a black-white couple being open, even in the Northeast where I was living. So I got home and I started thinking about it, and started writing the song, and then decided the girl probably would cop out in the end. Oh my gosh, back then people just lost their minds. People were wound so tight over that song. I mean, people would trip me as I tried to go up on stage. People would stop in the street, say, "Are you Janis Ian?" I'd say, "Yes." They'd spit in my face. It was just staggering how I can't imagine any song doing that now. I think it was very threatening, and I didn't realize the impact until people started telling me about it 10, 15 years ago. And I remember one boy said it wasn't that they were forbidden to listen to it, but he remembered his mother at her weekly coffee clatch with her friends, all of them saying, "Well, what would you do if your child brought home a black? Would you let them date? How would you stop them?" And he said it became a talking point for his neighborhood on Long Island. I hadn't even realized that. It's a great record. It's as much the record as the song. It was produced by Shadow Morton, who was coming off of the Shangri-Las and was known for making epic records. It had some of the finest players in New York City on it, and it's a great record. I say that because I was there and I helped with the arrangement, but it's really more Shadow's record than it is mine, my song. No, one of our closest friends was Ingrid and Ronnie and their children. They were a mixed-race couple. My parents were both first-generation Americans. My grandparents came here from Russia and Poland for the American dream. You know, I like to say that I am the American dream. I am the second-generation American kid who, through hard work and talent and guts and determination, made it. And that's the goal that my grandparents held. My parents, though, were also very liberal. They believed firmly that in school desegregation, they marched against Vietnam. So I was raised as, I guess, something close to what we now call a red diaper baby. They weren't technically communists, but my mother was a socialist, Leninist, Trotskyite, or a Trotskyite. I can never quite get it straight. But she was a firm believer that people were essentially good and would do good given the opportunity, that everyone deserved the right to an education, to health, which we see is still controversial, health care, and that everyone should be allowed to climb as far as they possibly could, be they black, white, Jew, Christian, whatever. And sometimes that view is not very popular. I hadn't realized how much until I wrote the book. I hadn't really understood what a strong influence that had. It was at war between, I think, what the 60s on the surface looked like. The music industry was a microcosm for. The 60s looked like, from the outside, it was a war between the old and the young. And the music business was the war between the entrenched and the not entrenched, particularly with folk music coming along, people like me, or well before me, Dylan and Baez, saying, all we need is a great song. We don't need pretty costumes. We don't need makeup. We don't need beautiful lighting. We need a great song. It's not that different from any great upheaval in an art world or in an area of the arts, but it was concurrent with the rise of FM radio, which suddenly made the same music available all over the country. The rise of the 50,000-watt station, WSM was the first. The rise of the counterculture, if you will. I mean, you know all this better than I do. Well, the bottom line is, if you didn't live through that era, another thing I realized while I was writing the book, if you were fortunate or unfortunate enough to be born in the 70s or the 80s, man, you really missed a lot, because it was a cool era. The access that fame brings is pretty extraordinary. You'd realize they knew your name. I just went through this with Vince Gill. About a year and a half ago, I sort of know Vince in passing, but he passed me somewhere in a restaurant and said, "Hey, Janis." And I thought, oh my God, Vince Gill, arguably one of the great songwriters of my time, knows my name. Awesome. Still a huge thrill. I think that the hardest thing is an artist to understand, because as an artist, you want a home. You long for a home. You grow up a little disconnected from everybody around you because your mind is just in a different place. And your record company, when I was growing up, was part of what you looked to as a home. Your publisher might be part of what you look to as a home. And of course, everyone has to leave home, but it's usually not with a kick in the butt. And that's unfortunately the norm with record companies, who you learn as you get older and have a little more time and space, are driven by dollars. They're a business. It's hard to understand and separate out that you are a commodity, but you can still be human while being a commodity, and that it's okay to be a commodity so long as you understand it. It was very hard for me. I think that kids coming up in the business nowadays, a Taylor Swift, knows that almost from the time they start. But my generation, started from a much more naive place of, oh, you know, we're all wonderful and we all want the world to be better. It's like the politics. Who knew that those politicians and the entrenched powers that be would go to those lengths to stay in power? We would never have believed that. And I think in a way it's the same with any industry. Well, you know, he was crazy. One of the things the book gave me was some distance from the anger I felt at him, because he was pretty abusive, and I was stuck. And I went from being, I say in the book, one of those women who would look at abused women's stories and go, oh, I'm smart, I'm wealthy, I'm talented, that'll never happen to me. And then it happened to me. And I saw how you get sucked in, and then how the hooks get tight. And it took me many, many years to get those hooks out. But one of the things the book gave me that was wonderful was some distance from the anger that I'd felt at him. And it helped that he was already dead, too, I have to say. No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I know people whose parents divorced when they were young, who then go into their own marriages with the attitude, I will never get a divorce. I think I stayed married to Tino in part because there was a lot of good to him and I genuinely loved him, in part because the hooks went in so deep that I didn't even realize how co-opted I had become, and in part because I very badly wanted to have children with him. And part of the dissolution of the marriage was when I realized that I would never have children or be able to bear children, and he refused to adopt. Well, yeah, I think I had always been in love with women before, except for my first boyfriend, Peter, God bless him. And then with Tino, I fell in love with a man. I see no dichotomy in that. I see nothing strange about it. But for a lot of people, it's very confusing that you can actually be in love with either gender. For me, I know that my tilt is toward women. And having been with Pat now 20 years and assuming it'll be the rest of my life, I would say I'm firmly rooted in that. But I'm not comfortable quantifying my sexuality by saying I am this or I am that. I think it's a vital part of my life. It's like I always thought that I wrote more sociological songs than political. As political as Society's Child may have become, it's really a social song, just like At 17 is a social song. And in that sense, maybe I'm just getting tired as I get older, but you realize that so much is an accident of birth. Your sexual tilt, your religion, your nationality, it's all accidents of birth. So how can you get crazy over those things? Does that make sense? Well, I have a hard time jumping on a bandwagon, be it being gay, being Jewish, being whatever. About the only bandwagon I'm comfortable with is being a songwriter, because I really do know about that. Everything else, either an accident of birth or something that I don't understand myself, so how can I make judgment calls about it? But I would hope that somebody reading the book would come away with what I hope to accomplish with people who listen to my music, which is a very live and let live attitude, and also that, as my partner says with my Pollyanna attitude, I really do think that goodness triumphs. I really do believe that people are essentially good, that given the chance they will do good, and that given a chance we can all rise to be the most that we can be. I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but I really believe that. But that's the music industry. You know, it's when I lecture sometimes, I always say, this is the business of failure. This is not the business of success. You will fail many, many more times than you'll succeed. And for those of us who don't understand that, and you think about Michael Jackson, who was at Columbia at the same time I was, when Thriller came out, his biggest concern was, could he beat Thriller? If the next album didn't beat the one previous, he was a failure. I don't know how you can fail after 40 million albums sold. I would be so, thank you very much, I'm going to do something else now for the rest of my life because I don't have to earn a living. But for most people, they measure their success in things like statistics. Another thing that you learn writing a book like that is that has nothing to do with it. Money has nothing to do with it. And if you're willing to accept that judgment as valid, God love you for it. But I've never been fortunate enough to have a string of success that lasted long enough that the industry considered me successful. I was always successful by a fluke. Society's Child was a fluke. At 17 was what? 12 years later, 10 years later, that was a fluke. Fly Too High was a fluke. I think the one thing the industry agrees on is that I'm a success as a songwriter, but not financially, not the way an Elton John is, not the way a Carole King is. So I learned early to measure my success by my own yardstick. Ella Fitzgerald thought I was a great singer. Boy. That's success. You have to decide pretty early on in the arts, I think, what you're going to measure your success by. Is it going to be by your own standard and the judgment of your peers, or is it going to be by the industry standard? And I was forced to decide that it would be by my peers because I realized I was never going to have the kind of career that Billy Joel has. One of the best examples in my life of that is a song called My Tennessee Hills. I started it 4 or 5 years earlier, had a chorus about my Tennessee Hills, got nowhere, put it aside. 4 or 5 years later, was looking through an old notebook, looked at it and thought, oh my gosh, that's a George Jones song. Wrote it that day, finished it, and then got to sing it with Dolly Parton. But the thing that people usually don't realize about that is that it wasn't that I wrote it that day. It was the 40 years before that. Every time you sit down to write a song, you're sitting down to practice. Every time you finish a song, you've finished your practice session. So when inspiration hits in the middle of the night, it's usually because that motor is well oiled and you're ready for it. Inspiration can hit anybody and they don't know what to do with it because the motor's not oiled. One of the cool things about Nashville's attitude as songwriters is that there's no shame in writing 3 songs a week and nobody hearing them, because you figure that sooner or later you'll write the one that somebody will hear. Well, she called and she said, hi, this is me, and it's indicative of her level of fame that I knew exactly who it was. Oh my gosh. And she was doing A Star Is Born and wanted to know would I write the music. And yeah, shoot, one of my favorite all-time films, Judy Garland, oh my gosh, yeah. And she wound up the conversation saying something like, well, that's great. When you get an idea, give me a call and we'll talk about it. And I, in my naivete, said, why would I want to call you and talk about it? I'll be writing the song. And she said, well, so we can discuss some ideas. And I said, again, with no malice intended, why would I want to discuss a song with you? You're an actress. I'm a songwriter. And needless to say, I didn't get to write the song. I have to say, the next time I ran into her, she was very nice to me, and I hope to God she's forgotten about it. It was the weirdest thing, John. I set foot here in 1986 to write. I had been sent here by my publisher. My foot hit the tarmac at the old airport, and I thought, I'm home. that was the weirdest thing because I had no connection to Nashville, but I felt at home from the minute I landed here. The city's been very, very good to me. Well, my partner's here, my friends are here, my life is here. It's a good community. All the things people say, really, ultimately, because I found a home here. I want to write lots more books. If I can ever get off the road long enough, yeah. I enjoy the road work, but you know, I'm 58. I'm not 28, and it's a lot harder every year. I'd rather stay home. I'm pretty good at growing tomatoes. Knock wood. Knock wood. It's a beautiful thing. I hope so. Thank you.